Welcome everyone. Um, Congratulations to Bill Lowry, and I will now introduce you to our panelists this evening. We have Bill Lowry, um, Stephanie Fryberg, Dr. Fryberg, Carla Ainsworth, and Shaka Smart. William E., and I'll start in introducing our panelists. William E., or Bill Lowry, also known as the GOAT, presently serves as chairman of the Illinois Labor Relations Board. From November 2008 to October 2017, he served as special assistant to the president of the Chicago Community Trust. Primarily, he was charged with enhancing the programs and image of the trust and extending the reach and effectiveness of the office of president. Prior to the trust, Bill was the senior advisor to the president of the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation. In that position, he served as the main foundation representative to City of Chicago officials and to nonprofits in Chicago. He also served in an advisory role on human resources related matters. Bill joined MacArthur in 1994 as vice president of the Human Resources and Administration, a position he held until October 2006. However, his association with the foundation began in 1993 as a human resources consultant. At that time, he was also chief operating officer at James H. Lowry and Associates, a management consulting firm. Before working with Lowry and the company's training group, before working with Lowry and Associates, Bill was with Inland Steel Industries. He started with Inland in 1962 as a member of the company's training group and rose through the ranks to become corporate director of personnel and recruitment. He retired from Inland in 1993. In 1967, Bill began a television career when he hosted the Emmy and Peabody award-winning television show Opportunity Line, a weekly 30-minute program on employment issues. The show's title changed to Objective Jobs in 1982. It aired until 1991. Both programs appeared on Chicago's CBS affiliate WBBM TV and serviced over 1 million people regarding job placement and training. At present, Bill serves on the boards of Shirley Ryan Ability Lab and the Chicago City Colleges Foundation Board. In addition, he is a trustee of Kenyon College and is a member of the Chinese American Service League's Advisory Council. Through the years, Bill has been a member of several boards in Chicago, including the Donors Forum of Chicago, United Way, Crusade of Mercy, Illinois Issues, the Chicagoland Project with Industry, Boys and Girls Club of Chicago, United Charities of Chicago, Lake Forest College, and Francis W. Parker School. Bill's ties with Chicago have been strong throughout the years, where he has served as the president of the Private Industry Council and the Chicago Workforce Board. In 1996, he was appointed chair of the City-County Task Force on Welfare Reform by Mayor Richard M. Daley. He served in that capacity until 2000. Bill is a native Chicagoan and earned his A.B. degree from Kenyon College and his master's degree from Loyola University of Chicago. Welcome, Bill Lowry. Stephanie A. Fryberg, a member of the Tulalip tribes, is the University Diversity and Social Transformation Professor of Psychology at the University of Michigan. As a social and cultural psychologist, her primary research focuses on how social representations of race, culture, and social class influence the development of self, psychological well-being, and educational attainment, and on designing interventions that reconfigure educational spaces to improve outcomes for racial minority and low-income students. Select publications include The Truly Diverse Faculty, New Dialogues in American Higher Education, Cultural Models of Education and Academic Performance for Native American and European American Students, Unseen Disadvantage, How American Universities Focus on Independence Undermines the Academic Performance of First-Generation College Students, When the World is Colorblind, American Indians Are Invisible, a Diversity Science Approach, and Of Warrior Chiefs and Indian Princesses, the Psychological Consequences of American Indian Mascots on American Indians. In recognition of her work and service to the field, Dr. Fryberg received the Society for the Psychological Study of Social Issues, Louise Kidder Early Career Award, Otto Kleinberg Intercultural and International Relations Award, University of Arizona 5-Star Faculty Award, the Society for Personality and Social Psychology Service Award, and in 2011 was inducted into the Multicultural Alumni Hall of Fame at Stanford University. Dr. Fryberg also provided testimony to the U.S. Senate Committee on Indian Affairs regarding the impact of racist stereotypes on Indigenous people, was lead psychologist on an amicus brief for Harjo v. Pro Football, served as an expert witness in the Keepsiegel v. U.S. Department of Agriculture class action lawsuit, and currently serves as the lead researcher for Illuminative, a national research-based effort to shift the narrative about and decrease bias toward Native people. Welcome, Dr. Fryberg.
Thank you.
Carla Ainsworth was in the Kenyon class of 1995. When she graduated Phi Beta Kappa as a double major in chemistry and history, she swam all 4 years at Kenyon and won 26 individual and relay national titles as part of 4 consecutive team championships for the ladies. She was 3-time NCAA Division III Swimmer of the Year, the 1994 Honda Award winner for Division III, and selected as one of the NCAA's today's top 8 for the class of 1995. After Kenyon, Carla went on to attend Washington University in St. Louis for her medical degree, followed by a master's in public health at UC Berkeley. She completed her training in family medicine and a fellowship in geriatric medicine in Seattle, Washington, where she has practiced in a variety of settings for the past 16 years. She spent much of that time working as faculty and served as the residency program director at Swedish Family Medicine, supervising 40 physicians across 3 clinics, while training the next generation of family doctors. Since 2019, she has worked for Laura Primary Care, leading 2 clinics in the Seattle area focused on providing comprehensive primary care for older adults. She also serves on the executive committee of the Washington Academy of Family Physicians Foundation and volunteers for Seattle's African American Health Board. Carla was recently honored by the NCAA as one of their Silver Anniversary Award winners at their annual convention in January 2020. When she's not working, Carla enjoys spending time with her husband, Mark, also a member of the Kenyon class of 95, and their 2 teenage children and their pit bull, Lily. Welcome, Carla Ainsworth. And last but not least, Shaka Smart is joining us tonight. Shaka Smart enters his 6th season as the head basketball coach at the University of Texas in 2020-2021. The leader of a Virginia Commonwealth University program that advanced to the 2011 Final Four and posted at least 26 wins in each of his 6 seasons at the school, Smart became the 24th head basketball coach at Texas on April 3rd, 2015. In 11 seasons overall as a collegiate head coach, the 43-year-old Smart has compiled a record of 253 wins and 134 losses. 7 of his first 10 teams advanced to NCAA tournament play prior to the 2019-2020 season being cut short due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Under Smart's direction, the mission of the Texas basketball program is clear and simple: to create and sustain championship-level success. Smart and his staff want to develop each student athlete within the program into the best possible version of himself. The 3 core values of the Texas basketball program are relationships, growth, and victory. Despite a rash of injuries during the final third of the year that sidelined as many as 5 rotation players for extended action, the Longhorns registered a 19-12 record and tied for 3rd place in the Big 12 Conference during the 2019-2020 season. UT was the number 4 seed in the Phillips 66 Big 12 Championship, but the league's postseason tourney and all postseason college basketball was canceled due to the COVID-19 pandemic. A 4-year starter and 3-year team captain at Kenyon College, Smart graduated magna cum laude in 1999 with a degree in history. He still holds the school records for most single season and career assists, with 184 in the 1998-99 season and 542 throughout his Kenyon career. A native of Madison, Wisconsin, Smart was born on April 8, 1977. He and his wife, Maya, have one daughter, Zora. Smart gave the commencement address in May 2016 for the University of Texas Department of History. He also delivered the main commencement speech address for his alma mater, Kenyon College, in May 2017. Welcome, Shaka Smart. And now I'll hand it over to Kenyon's president, President Decatur, to moderate our discussion tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Felicia. Thank you for those introductions, and thanks to you and the students and the coaches who have really put in a lot of work to conceiving and moving forward not only tonight's panel, but the panel earlier this week from students on a similar topic. And thanks to all of you who have tuned in this evening for joining us here. And of course, thanks to our panel for coming together on this evening. This is really a wonderful way to celebrate Founders Day here on campus. So I'd like to start off with a question really to each of you. I wondered if each of you could just reflect a bit on sort of two things. One, how you chose your sport. So what was it that led you into the sport in which you competed at Kenyon? And then how did you choose Kenyon? So what brought you to Kenyon? And so I'll maybe go in the same order that Felicia introduced folks. So Bill, I'll start with you. Oh, and Bill, I think you may need to unmute.
Thank you.
Good.
I think I'd like to reverse that if I can, maybe talk about how I got to Kenyon first, and then maybe I can talk about selection of sports. I got to Kenyon actually by luck, because it just so happened that three guys that graduated in the high school that I was in a year before I did came to Kenyon, and they told the then I guess the dean of students or admissions that when he makes his recruiting trip to Chicago, that he should check in with Bill Lowry because he thinks Bill Lowry would like Kenyon and Kenyon would like Bill Lowry. Until that point, I didn't know anything about Kenyon. And so he did. And I applied. And one of the things that I remember at my old age was that years at that time, Kenyon had an activity called pre-freshman week or something like that in the spring. And so this was for people that had been accepted, but they had not made a choice. And so I came down to Kenyon and saw Kenyon for the first time. And aesthetically, it was the most beautiful thing I think I'd ever seen. Looked a lot different from the south side of Chicago. And I thoroughly enjoyed that. And I said, this place is for me. And so I signed up, and I got here that September, and all three of those guys that were responsible for Ben had been kicked out. They had been wonderful guys, but they had failed to do something that's fairly important, and that was like study. But they were all bright guys. So that's how I selected Kenyon, and I got here. And as I tell people, that was what, 68 years ago or so, and I came and I left my heart here, but it's been here ever since. In terms of selecting the sports, I played three. So, and people would normally ask me, say, well, which sport do you like? I said, well, my answer to them was, I like the sport I was playing. And I grew up in the park, really, in Chicago, in the largest park in Chicago, Washington Park, playing ball. And it started with baseball. And this dates me quite a bit, but I preceded Little League. And so we didn't have a Little League when I was coming up. I'm 11 years old or so. I decided we ought to have a team. So I got all the little guys together on the block, and we started a baseball team. And I started booking games for 11 and 12-year-olds around the city of Chicago. And one of our ball players' dad, who happened to be, at the time, I didn't know this, but he was a big time gambler in Chicago. He bought us uniforms. And so we went around and we had uniforms with the Third Ward Democrats on the back. And we didn't live in the Third Ward, but anyway, we had our uniforms. And so baseball got me started. And then I also, at that same time, was playing football in the Park League in Chicago, in Washington Park, which was the largest park. It is the largest park in Chicago. And of the league, of those park leagues, that was the only park that had Black participants. And we played our games on Saturday mornings. And I think you had to be a max of 12 years old or maybe 13. And in terms of weight, I guess it was something like 110 pounds. And they would select from that league 2 teams each Sunday to play in the halftime of the Bear games or the Cardinal games. And so I got introduced to what it was like playing before 58,000 people on a Sunday. And I guess that's when the bug really hit me. It was exhilarating. So I enjoyed that. So it wasn't any particular thing that got me started in terms of making a selection. It was, I think, sports itself. And my dad was a sports enthusiast, and obviously took me to games and did things. But for me, it was just the total sports, and whatever sport was in season was the sport that I wanted, and I tried to do it.
Nope. Thank you, Bill. And Stephanie, how about you?
Yes, thank you. Well, I also am going to follow Bill's lead. So I grew up on the reservation, and I grew up playing basketball. But when I was 10 years old, my tribe started paying for us to get to do other sports. So I also was a swimmer. And so I actually was a transfer student at Kenyon. So I swam before coming to Kenyon. But when I moved to Kenyon, it was partly because I was lost. I was a kid who I'd never known anyone who'd gone to college. I was struggling. I really started to understand issues of inequality, which probably explains why I do what I do now. But I really left. So I was at Whitman College in Washington State, and I actually grew up, my reservations in Washington State. And so I got to Kenyon and I didn't want to swim. I was trying to figure out why I was in college. And it turns out the first couple students I met at Kenyon were basketball players and talked me into playing. And it turned out I was okay. And so I really ended up, playing the 3 years that I was at Kenyon. And it was a real eye-opening experience for me. I think, again, like for me, so much of my experience has been about overcoming both some of the traumas of growing up on the reservation. It's a really hard place to grow up. I saw a lot of hardship. I think as a kid, we didn't have running water, running sewer. And then to go to a place like Kenyon or even Whitman, where there was so much privilege. And I don't mean that in any like demeaning sort of way, but I remember when I first got there walking through the student parking lot and realizing that I was seeing cars that I'd only seen on TV. And so it was a real like eye-opening experience for me being at Kenyon. But basketball grounded me. I mean, the friends there became, some of my closest friends, aside from the other students in psychology that I was close to, as well as, I definitely found groups of students of color at Kenyon. I was the only native there. And so finding students, like some of my close friends were from Cleveland, places where I could relate, or people from the Midwest. And it was, basketball was really important for me. It was a time where both, I think I made some really critical mistakes. But when I look back, I understand that a lot of those mistakes were me trying to overcome the trauma of my past and learning how to trust people and to, really allow myself to be fully part of the team. And then some of it was just that, you know, being part of a team is a great thing. You know, you get that win or lose, you have that experience of coming out every day and working hard together. You know, I think winters in Kenyon are not to be overlooked. As a kid from the Pacific Northwest, like I just remember times of like walking up that hill and my eyelashes were like ice, and you know, I could feel the ice coming out of my nose and my hair like being just solid, you know, icicles by the time we got up to eat. And so, I mean, there were a lot of things about Kenyon that really helped me to grow up. And sports were one of them. It was a really important time in my life.
Thank you, Stephanie. Carla.
Yeah, I guess I'll start first with being a swimmer. I was raised by a single mom who needed me to have something to do every day after school. So in 5th grade, I was taking dance class 3 days a week, and I needed something to do on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And it turned out to be the swim team. So that was actually for kids who were already like past like the beginner level. It was like the intermediate level. And the coach was like, well, can she do a flip turn? And my mom was like, oh, she'll be fine. And so I had to go Tuesday, Thursday, because that was the day that worked for her schedule. For those of you who know my mom, I know Bill, my mom adored Bill, but that's not a surprise that that's how that started. But it was just something that brought me a lot of joy. It was really fun. I got to do a lot of different things. And you know, I think there's a lot of opportunities to get better and to see yourself getting better in swimming, both as an individual and as part of a team. And for that, that was really satisfying. But, you know, I think less so than kids today. I did dance, I played volleyball, I was in choir, you know, I still got a chance to do a lot of other things, and swimming was sort of part of what I did, you know, until I came to college. And then for Kenyon, for me, you know, I was looking at some bigger schools, at some Division I schools to swim. And I knew if I wanted to go to a small college, which had a lot of appeal to me just from as a learner and as a sort of engaged student and citizen, I guess I would call it. I knew that Kenyon was going to let me do all of the things that I wanted to do. And if I wanted to go to a small college and be a swimmer, then the place that you wanted to go was Kenyon College. The legacy and the tradition and the teams that Jim Steen had built, I knew it was going to be a place that I was going to be able to show up and have a lot of success. And so I was really glad to come and be a part of that.
Thank you, Carla. And Shaka.
Hi, everybody. It's good to see you guys tonight. Felicia, thanks for all those great introductions. I was also raised by a single mom, so that's kind of what took me into basketball. I didn't really have any family influences in that sport, but I always looked at coaches as, you know, potential father figures for me. And so I played, like Bill, I played every sport under the sun: baseball, basketball, track, soccer, variety of sports. But I guess it was my basketball coaches that took the most interest in me. So I took the most interest in basketball. And then for Kenyon, there was a coach at Kenyon at the time named Bill Brown. I'm probably one of the few people that went to a Division III school because of the coach. But that's how crazy I was about basketball. And then, so he recruited me. And then Peter Rutkoff, who's on this call now, who one of the best professors Kenyon's ever had, and is someone that I owe a lot to, also been a father figure for me. He called me at my house and he explained why I should come to Kenyon and study history. And I thought it was a good idea. So I came to visited a bunch of other schools, but really the people at Kenyon were very, very nice and accommodating. And it just seemed like a place to be. So that's why I ended up at Kenyon.
Thank you. Thanks to all of you. And so for the next question, actually, I think I'd like to start with Stephanie, and wondering if you could reflect, was there any kind of critical moment of awareness about what it meant to be an athlete of color in your sport? Either sort of before Kenyon, at Kenyon, outside of campus, but is there something that you reflect on in terms of awareness of that, the connection between your identity as a person of color, your identity as a student athlete?
Yeah, I mean, so one thing I'll say is that for me, growing up, basketball was a res game. I mean, it was something we played on the res. We went and competed against other tribes. I played in school, but like there was nothing like playing Indian ball. And so, you know, that was a big part of my identity. But I think as a person of color, probably the biggest, like, real eye-opening experience I had was actually swimming. I competed in an international swim meet when I was 16 in Canada. And when I got there, you know, I was warming up. And when I got out of the pool, there were two officials who were standing there who were watching me. And when I got out, they approached me and said, "We heard you are from a reservation." And I said, "Yes, I am." And they said, "How did you learn to swim?" And so at first I was kind of taken aback. And then I quickly realized that they thought we couldn't have had pools. And so what's terrible is actually made up a story. So I mean, I was 16. I was deeply offended. And so, you know, I basically told them that we lived on the bay, which is true, and that I learned to swim in the bay. And they said, "But we watched you. You have really good flip turns." And I said, "Oh yeah, we just pushed logs out into the water and we would practice like flipping over." And so then the next question was, well, how did you learn about this meet? Like, how did you get here? And so I had been picked for the state all-star team. And I said, "Oh, well, you know, just like everybody else, I was picked to be on the team." And they said, "Well, but I mean, how did they get you the message?" And so this is when I realized, like, literally they thought it was like the Wild West and I lived in a teepee. And so I made up this story about this guy who stayed by the freeway and would take those messages and basically send smoke signals out to the reservation, and we would get this. So, I mean, what is funny, I mean, you know, I mean, so I was a teenager. I was kind of not happy about the situation. But the worst part is that my coach heard me and basically came over and said, "You cannot leave that story out there. You have to tell them that you swam in a pool and that you," I remember being really angry and just being like, "No, they don't deserve that." And so she told me, she's like, "You have to be part of setting the narrative straight." And so she made me go over and tell them the truth. But what's so funny now is that that's literally what I do, is I work on narrative change in the country. And so it's somewhat ironic to realize that many of those early stories are the same stories that are driving the work I do to make life better for my children, you know, to create change for children, Native children nationally, but even for other students of color. It's, you know, how we tell history, how we tell the story of inequity in this country is a huge indicator of how people respond to us. And, you know, we've certainly reached a reckoning where that has to change. So that's my kind of, I realize it's not quite tied to my Kenyon basketball experience, but it was a really big experience for me growing up as a kid.
Oh, that's great. Thank you for that. And Carla, I wondered if you could reflect on the same question. So is there do you have something that stands out as a critical moment of awareness for you in terms of your identity, both as a person of color and as an athlete?
It's really hard to follow Stephanie's story. That's so good. Oh, and I mean, you know, as a swimmer, you know, I acknowledge, I mean, I think the othering of any person who is not white on a swim deck, you know, for Stephanie and I are about the same age, right? Like that's a really sort of common thing, right? And like sort of the misunderstanding of the fact that like, you know, that Black people can't float or so they can't be good swimmers, or sort of all of the sort of myths and fables out there. that sort of are the flip side of a really difficult thing, which is, America's historic attempts to deny people of color access to pools, right? Like the reason people can't swim is because they didn't have access to public pools, or we worked really hard to keep them out of pools. And what that meant was that we didn't teach kids of color to swim. And what that means is that kids of color are more likely to drown, right? So that instead, actually, we sort of tied these stories together to sort of make it okay to not give all kids the same kinds of opportunities for athletes and for sport. But I think it's really hard. I know things continue to change, but in the 90s, I know Stephanie referenced that she was the only Native person. I know when I was a junior, because of the folks who went abroad, I remember this so distinctively because I was trying to fill out a survey for something for school, that I was the only Black woman in my class on campus because everybody else had left to go abroad. And so I felt like I couldn't fill out a survey anonymously, right? Because they were going to know it was me, because who else could it be? So it wasn't really just about being an athlete. I mean, I think it was a thing that was present all the time. I think it's a thing that we've talked about some, at least in the places where I am this year, as the US has tried to have some sort of reckoning about the murder of George Floyd and other things that have happened, right? That I was aware every day that I was a student of color on Kenyon's campus. There were big ways and small ways that continued to show up for you and impact your ability to move through the world. And I think it's a thing that we want to be different and to be less, but it starts with people being able to know that all of the ways in which that shows up while people are trying to just move through the world and do their best work.
Thank you. Thanks. And then Shaka, I'd like to take a slightly different take on this question. What was the connection, or was there connection between athletics and your experience with athletics on campus and your experience as a student of color on campus at Kenyon?
It was the only two things I did. I didn't have much of a life outside of school and basketball. My mom raised me with two rules, and one of them was don't bring home a bad grade. To her, a bad grade was a B. So I probably set the record for the most time spent in the library in my class. And then I was in the gym a lot. So I guess the connection, Sean, would be I was competitive in both. In terms of my mindset. I remember my first day of English 1-2. As a freshman, I had Professor Ted Mason, and he came dressed in a three-piece suit like he does on the first day of class. And he promptly told us all that nobody would get higher than a B in the first semester. And I remember looking around, and there was all these kids from these prep schools and prestigious private schools, and I went to a public school that, wasn't particularly prestigious academically. And so it was an adjustment, learning to compete with those type of kids. But the one thing that Kenyon, I thought, did a phenomenal job of with me and all the, friends of mine that went to Kenyon is it really, really ignited an interest in, a variety of areas academically. But I went from wanting to do well in school for my mom to wanting to do well in school for myself, just wanting to be competitive. And as one of, a relatively small number of Black students, I remember feeling a responsibility to do well. And I don't know if that was real or something that I made up in my mind, but, Peter really helped cultivate that for me. But that was probably the biggest connection, is that there was the only two things I was doing, and I was pretty competitive in both.
Thank you. And I think I saw Professor Mason's name on the Zoom screen as well. So I think there are that many of your faculty have turned out tonight. So Bill, I was wondering, one of the things that was a question that I heard from the students who were putting this panel together and interested in this panel was that not only are Black students of color, underrepresented on the campus, but this is a part of the country, a town and an area in which one also stands out as a person of color in the area, where Black students and Black people are also underrepresented in the area. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about how that impacted your experience, or how did you experience that? How did you navigate that as a student at Kenyon? Bill, I think you're muted.
Let's try it again. I was saying, one of the things that I'm thinking about right now, Sean, is that as you get older, things begin to morph. And I'm trying to separate these things and as to what's true and what's actually happened, or what was the figment of my imagination. So trying to answer your question, in terms of athletics, and especially here, and being a jock, my race was always up front. I mean, the teams that I played against generally were white teams, and they never would let me, they wouldn't allow me to not remember the fact that I am Black, and that they knew I was Black. And one of the first things that happened here at Kenyon is that years ago, and I don't know what they do now, for the spring vacation, the lacrosse team and the baseball teams used to alternate years and go into Florida to play against the teams there in Florida for a week. And I guess it was my sophomore year that they had really determined the schedule and everything a couple of years ahead of time. And my coach was smart enough to say, I better let these people know in Florida that there's a fly in the buttermilk. And that was me. And so he did, and he let the coaches know in Florida that they had a Black team. I was the only Black on the baseball team. And every one of those teams, they canceled out. And they didn't want to play Kenyon. And so what he had to do, and this was strictly race related, he had to scurry around and try to find places where we could play the baseball team during that spring vacation. And so we ended up playing at military installations, Quantico Marines and Fort Lee, and maybe Marshall, and a few things. So it was very obvious where we were. And a lot of the things in terms of the color and the things that I went through didn't necessarily happen on the floor, didn't necessarily happen on the field, because some of these things were outside of there. Because as we were traveling around at this time on the spring vacation, and we did it in cars, and we piled in and we're driving in tandem, 2, 3, 4 cars. And I couldn't stay with my teammates, because as we were going through Virginia, West Virginia, and all these other places, I had to stay in Negro settlement houses while the teammates went to hotels and so on. But what was, I thought, a gesture that was very, I greatly appreciated, the team would then come to where I was in terms of the Black areas of the town, and we'd have dinner together that way. The other things on the field, it was, as I said, there was a constant reminder of my color, because not only was I called names throughout the games, and still keep in mind, we're talking 1952 to 1956. It's a long time ago. And you're right about the Midwest and the areas here and the schools here. And Kenyon only had, when I was here, we never had more than 4 Blacks on the campus at any one time. So when we talk about these teams, I was generally the only Black on the team as we were going through the seasons. And so I was confronted with my color every time I hit the field and every time I hit the floor. And if it wasn't something that people were said, it was something that they tried to do. So those things stayed in my mind. But that was also something that was happening at that time, Sean. So it wasn't that I separated that too much, because the same kinds of things was happening to me when I was in high school. I happened to go to an independent school in high school, and the same thing that was happening there was happening here at Kenyon. So these things, and as far as the school was concerned at Kenyon, I think that I was embraced as an athlete and as a student. And in the men's college, it was a men's college at that time too. And I think that's just something that you have to think about. I think that Kenyon is a marvelous institution now, and the fact that one of the greatest things that happened here was to admit women and make it co-ed. I think it made us a marvelous school, and I think it's a marvelous school now. But at that time, they were all men. And so we've got these grubby 480 people running around here, guys, and basically studying and drinking beer. And it was my case in terms of the athlete. I was sort of looked at and accommodated because of the fact that I was doing this, but the faculty of Kenyon at that time were very responsive to me as well. And to finish up with this, I had declared as a major philosophy. I enjoyed philosophy and wanted to do it. And the Professor Rice at that time was very interested in sports and apparently interested in me. And I was running into a problem because as a major, most of the courses that I was taking in a junior and senior year would be seminars. And I was traveling a lot on basketball teams, and we were playing at night. And I was having a difficult time scheduling the classes and also making the trips. And so he suggested, he says, I think that sports are very important. And I think especially for you, and I think it gives you an equilibrium and balance. And I would hate to see you not do this. So I suggested what you do is you pick another major that would be more accommodating in terms of your scheduling of your playing games, and then take as many philosophy courses as you can, if that's what you want to do. And that's exactly what I did. And that's when I switched and I took Shaka's major. I was a history major here, and took as many philosophy courses as I could. And that was largely on the advice of Professor Rice, who felt that sports for me at Kenyon College was very important to me and to Kenyon College. And I appreciated that at the time, and I appreciated it.
Thank you, Bill. I want to remind everyone in the audience that if you have a question for any or all of the panelists, you can enter it in to the chat. If you direct it to ask a question, we'll collect some questions around for the panelists. So I'd like to actually just have a couple of questions that are fairly like free for all for the panel. So kind of feel free to chime in. And to start with, just want to talk a bit about your how your Kenyon experience and in particular your athletic Kenyon experience and your experience as an athlete of color at Kenyon informed your life after graduation and sort of a life experience or your path after graduation. And so kind of, yeah, open for anyone who'd like to chime in.
Well, I think it goes without saying that, at least in my case too, a lot of the things that you experience and by playing, and I played team sports, that were necessary for you to operate as a team and the roles that you have in terms of pulling all of this together so that you can be successful. Those things stuck with me certainly as I went into the military and also as I went into industry, because some of the things that were very important to me in terms of sharing these common denominators, working together, everyone having a role that you play, and it's by pulling all these roles together that you're able to do something and collectively that could not be done individually. That stuck with me, and it sticks with me today. And I carry that with me. I always carry that with me, and those things that I learned here in terms of sports and I should say the outcomes of sports, if you're going to do it effectively, they also work in terms of what you do in your life, your daily life, and it was very helpful to me.
I'm curious, Stephanie, you've stayed in academics, you've stayed in kind of academic environments. I wonder, are there things about your Kenyon experience, either Kenyon experience in general, experience as an athlete, experience as a student of color, athlete of color at Kenyon that have run through your academic career?
Yeah, I mean, there's one lesson that I bring up commonly that I learned from Coach Osborne. She always used to say that what makes you great is when you surround yourself with people who are better than you. And so as a researcher, I oversee other postdocs. I have junior faculty who work with me, grad students, and I always think that my job is to help lift them up to be better than me and to surround me and be around me. So I mean it's a really interesting, like it might not seem like a big deal, but the number of people who feel threatened by great people around them is high. And it really taught me not to think about it that way. Like I think about mentoring my students, mentoring my grad students, mentoring other junior faculty in ways that I hope they're better than me. Like I hope I have done a great job when they stand beside me and I feel proud of who they have become. And together we do great work. And so, we right now have a group that we refer to as the research dream team, because everybody kind of has what they're great at. And we know, but we're all excited to double check each other's work. Like it's really, I mean, I think a lot of faculty think of it as their golden age. Like right now, everything about my research is clicking, both in how it's getting out, that we're making a difference. I mean, the Washington football team, that was influenced by my work. We've got work on murdered, missing Indigenous women and girls. We've got work on Columbus Day versus Indigenous Peoples Day. And all of that is because I have a great team. And so, that is something that I remember Coach Osborne telling me, that this is how she thought about being a coach. And it really stuck with me and has changed how I have gone through. So like if someone is unhappy with me, I think, okay, then I should rethink what I'm doing. Like, try to think, like, be willing to be self-critical in ways that we can both grow. And so I don't think that I would be half the researcher or professor that I am today if not for some of those really key experiences where, talking, like a great thing about Kenyon, like, at large universities, we don't always get to talk to undergrads a lot. But at Kenyon, like I knew a number of faculty members who I had long conversations with. I think about Professor Sheffield and, being in his seminar and how influential it was. And it's actually where I met the girls who talked me into playing basketball. But the class was all about social issues. And, at Kenyon, I was always the only one. And I didn't even know until I got to Kenyon, I didn't know there were places you could go where there weren't other Native people. And so it was a big eye opener for me. But these lessons have really taught me a tremendous amount about how to be a professional.
Thank you. And I noticed Professor Sheffield is also somewhere in the Zoom in the Zoom room, and so it's great to have another faculty shout out. So I want to stay on this theme of mentoring because Shaka and Carla, both of you mentor as well in your professional work in direct ways, and maybe Shaka, kind of starting with you, if you could follow on the same thing, connections between your Kenyon experiences in this and what you do now.
Well, I'm a coach, so I'm a little biased towards coaches, but a guy by the name of Bill Brown was the head basketball coach at Kenyon for about 8 to 10 years. And he's the number one reason I came to Kenyon. Because of him, he's African-American. Because of him, I was in the majority on our basketball team. I was not in the minority. So even though there wasn't a lot of Black students at Kenyon, we had 9 Black players on our team. Now, he left after my freshman year. It was one of the worst days of my life. I remember crying for 3 days. I was so down that he left. And when he did, a lot of players ended up leaving Kenyon or transferring, going to other schools. So it definitely fundamentally changed my experience. But absolutely, Sean, mentoring is something that I learned a lot about at Kenyon from not just Coach Brown, but from the faculty. You know, if we're going to talk about good things about Kenyon, I always go back to the faculty. By far the best part of my experience, and that's, you know, Black faculty like Rick Sheffield, white faculty like Peter Rutkoff. And now we didn't have a lot of Black faculty when I was there. So I know Kenyon has made some strides in that direction. But when you talk about mentoring, definitely for me, some of the lessons that I learned just came from people taking an interest in me. My wife went to Harvard and Northwestern. But when we compare academic experiences, it's not even close in terms of the relationships that I had with faculty members at Kenyon. And I know I was not unique in that way. It was just an extra level of interest. And I know this wasn't really your question, but when you talk about mentoring, that's what they did for me. They put their arm around me, whether they were my advisor or not. And that was, again, the best part of it for me. And I think anytime you are in a minority group and someone takes an interest in you as a person, that really, you know, teaches you a valuable lesson. So, you know, I owe Kenyon a debt of gratitude for that.
Yeah, thanks. And Carla, maybe reflections in the same direction on mentoring, both your mentoring experience at Kenyon and then the work that you do now.
Yeah, I think, you know, many of the things that Shaka and Stephanie and Bill have said ring true for me. And I think the power of relationships, I think particularly in a place where you feel like you don't have a lot of people who look like you doing the thing that you aspire to do, right? Which is a thing that I think we're all still working on in all of our professional worlds. If you have people around you who are still willing to say, if that's what you want to do, that's a thing that you can go do, right? When you have people who believe in you and believe in your potential and, you know, are even going to talk to you about things that maybe you hadn't considered for yourself. If you're somebody who didn't, like, I don't have anybody who is a physician in my family. So to think that that was a thing that I wanted to do or could do, but you know, people said, of course, like, you can do whatever you want to do. And that's not a thing that every kid gets to hear. You know, I think that aspect at Kenyon from a relationship perspective makes a lot of sense. And the thing about being an athlete at Kenyon that I still use in my professional work, physicians have really spent a lot of time trying to think about coaching as a way that physicians get better. So there's been Atul Gawande has written about this and just thinking about, like, how do we actually help professionals become better? And part of it is about really trying to, you know, identify what people are trying to work on and give them meaningful feedback. And that's a thing that involves taking time and trying to understand individuals. And that's a thing that for me, if you look at somebody like Jim Steen, who was the coach, you know, he had a lot of different athletes who had a lot of great talent, and he really was taking the time to try and understand what was going to make each person be successful, because finding that motivation, I'm sure it's true for those of you who are motivating students, right? Like, you can have two very smart students, but they need different interactions to be able to tap into their potential. And a really good coach is going to be able to figure out how to make that connection. And like Stephanie said, when it doesn't work, not to say like, well, I can't help you, but to say like, how can I approach this differently to help you to be successful? Like, how can I restructure this to make that connection, right? So to know sort of how much relationships matter and how much we need to just really invest in people, just knowing how much people invested in me to try to help me to be successful, that I'm so grateful for.
Thank you. And so I think we have a little bit of time. I want to take a question or two that have come in. And so Jill, do we have some questions that have come in?
Sure, thank you, Sean. Here's a question that asks, based on your experience at Kenyon, what advice would you have for current students of color at Kenyon?
It's a very interesting question. And I think a lot depends, it's generational. I keep talking about how long ago it was that I was here. And And what I have experienced, not only myself, but through my children and now my grandchildren, as an African American, I think your frame of reference is changes. When I came to Kenyon College, I didn't come here as a result of wanting to have an environment that was primarily Black, or I could relate to some of these. I didn't think about that at all. I was thinking about trying to get a degree at a place where the degree meant something, and I could use it in terms of trying to enrich my life and those around me. My son and daughter, as they went on to college and so forth, it became a little bit more important in terms of their selection now to have a critical mass of African Americans there so that they could feel more comfortable in terms of that environment. And then I now have grandchildren who've gone through college, and now they have more of the same. In fact, they're looking for even a deeper penetration of the culture that they can share and be welcomed. So in terms of talking to people now, and I talked to some people that now are freshmen at Kenyon and talked to them before, and I guess I will tell you what I guess I was telling them. A lot depends on what you're looking for out of the school. If you're coming to a school that you're looking for a rigorous kind of academics that you can get through and to obtain a degree or something that's going to be meaningful to you and to others, then you think about a Kenyon, you think about some of the other places. If you're thinking about some things that are far more social in terms of your needs, your particular needs as an individual, then maybe a Kenyon is not the kind of place that you want to think about. But if you're also, we're getting back to the mentoring, and the more I think about this in terms of the application that I had in my life, it wasn't so much the athletics at Kenyon that made the difference, that gave me guideposts and things to think about and do to apply in my life, as it was the culture that exists at Kenyon and the environment at Kenyon and the intimacy of Kenyon. And as Jack has talked about and others, the interest that was shown to me in terms of the faculty, in terms of coaches and so forth, was the most important thing to me. And it wasn't playing it that was important. What was important was playing for some people that seemed to be genuinely interested in you and your development, which I carried with me and going into other lives. I wasn't the coach that Shaka is, but I also coached for a couple of years. I coached football and basketball. And the most important thing to me was to try to actualize the potential that these kids have. And I was more important in their development maybe than they were, but that was extremely important to me. And I wanted to let them know that I was genuinely interested in them and their development. And that started at Kenyon.
Thanks. So others to chime in, advice for current students of color.
Sean, I would say the first piece of advice I would give them is don't be afraid to be yourself, and don't be afraid to assert your Blackness if you're Black, or whatever it is, whatever race you have. I think anytime you're in a minority group, there can be a tendency to feel like you have to fit in, but I think you can fit in at Kenyon without taking away from anything that is the real you. One of the great things about Kenyon is just how open-minded people are and how willing people are to embrace people that are a little bit different from them. And my second piece of advice would be, I know I keep beating this drum, would be to take advantage of all the people there, and to really, if you're a sponge, to soak up as much as you possibly can. Because I think as a person of color, kids that go to Kenyon certainly have options to go to other really, really high-level schools. But if they do, they're not necessarily going to have the same experience in terms of the faculty that the kids do at Kenyon. So I think really, really soaking that up so that when you do look back on your college experience, you have no regrets in terms of what you took advantage of. That would be my biggest advice. And then I'll give you one more, Sean. And I know we're being highly positive on this Zoom, but Don't be afraid to speak up if you see something that is offensive or rubs you the wrong way. I'll never forget walking through the South Quad. I'm not sure if you guys still call it that, where the dorms are in the south end of campus. And there was a student that had a Confederate flag up in their window of the dorm. And I went into the dorm, I knocked on his door, and I asked him to take it down. And we ended up having a pretty heated discussion, but it ended up being good because we kind of had a dialogue. I listened to him. He was from, I think, Tennessee. He talked about, what that meant to him. I think he listened to me. At the end of the day, I think he took the flag down. But again, my advice is, if you see something you don't like or something that, turns you off, it's your home just as much as it is anyone else's. So don't be afraid to speak up for yourself.
Thank you. Any other advice?
I might just chime in to sort of follow up on Shaka's last comment, which is just, I think when you hear the stories that Bill can tell, or when you think about the experiences of students who are in college today, like a lot has changed. I mean, it's been 70 years almost, but a lot has changed. But I think oftentimes for younger folks, it feels like it's not changing as fast as they want it to. I mean, be clear, for all of us, we feel like it's not changing as fast as we want it to, but we've come to different terms of understanding about that as we've been on this planet for a longer period of time. But don't be discouraged, and don't feel like it's not okay to continue to expect and demand change. I mean, I think that's what I'd say. Like I spend a lot of time when I was trying to work with doctors in training, sort of saying to them, I know you're frustrated. We're working on it. It's not going to be as fast as you want it to be. I imagine that some of you in academic settings have found yourself saying this when people come to you with frustrations and things they want to have fixed. But it's like, so hear that. We're saying that because it's true, but you are still allowed to want and demand things to be different and to be clear that the status quo isn't okay. And I think we've made some progress on that, but we're really counting on you guys to lead us forward to a better future. So, that happens. You start to build those skills in small ways, in small spaces. A space like Kenyon is really safe, where you can sort of speak up and say something and feel like you're going to have a chance to have a conversation and maybe get a different outcome. So practice that, because it's going to serve you as you move through the world forever.
Thanks.
I will add one last thing. I mean, I wasn't speaking up because I think a lot of the things that have been said, I absolutely agree with. The one thing that I happened upon by chance, but that was really life-changing, is I got involved in research. So I literally ran into a professor on Middle Path my first day trying to figure out what classes to get into. And, she offered to meet with me after lunch, and we did. And I mean, I ended up doing research with her for 3 years, doing a honors thesis on Native American college students when I was the only one at Kenyon. Like, I mean, if that isn't a tribute to, there are no limitations except the ones you put on yourself. So I just think so much about, we sometimes think like college can be about fun and, maybe going and partying on the weekends, going to social events, but like Kenyon had real research opportunities. So I went from Kenyon to Stanford, and if not for doing honors there, if not having, happened upon this person, Sarah Mernon, on Middle Path, I don't know what I would have ended up becoming. But I mean, it absolutely was something where she, even though she studies gender issues, I talked to her about doing a project on Native Americans, and not once did she ever say no. And, we just got really creative and figured out how I got 80 Native students from across the country to complete my survey. I mean, it was such a defining moment, this idea that I could use research to solve social problems was a really big thing for me. And so I really think like it's not just taking advantage of the faculty and the relationships you can have with them, which are actually pretty amazing, but really like recognizing that there are faculty doing really cool things. And if you take the time to sort of find out and ask if you can get involved, like, man, sky's the limit. I mean, here I am, this kid who went from the reservation to Kenyon College to Stanford, and now is a faculty member. Like it, you know, there was at no point in my life where I envisioned that next step. It came through the people I met and engaged with, and that led me to those next steps.
Thank you. And I think we are closing in on, we've now kind of gone about an hour. So I think we're kind of closing in at the end of the session. And so I'd like to thank, certainly go back and thank Felicia for kind of the work behind this and for that wonderful setup for the conversation. Thanks to Joe McCartney, our athletics director, and the athletics team for their work in making this happen. And a special thanks to our panelists, to Stephanie and Carla and Shaka, and of course today especially a wonderful shout out to Bill. And we are again delighted to now share in the Lowry Center from now and onward in the future on campus, which we're really excited about. So thanks to everyone for tuning in. Again, thanks to our panelists, and everyone have a good night. Thank you.
Thank you very much.